think it costs like a few $100 million to build. Now, what's crazy is we know what that supercomputer does because we humans put the software on it. We don't know our software. Validation from others is a drug. Like you get it and you're like, yes, I feel great. And then 30 seconds later, the drug wears off and you're like, somebody tell me I'm amazing again. I watch a few things about other people who succeed in business with ADHD, which I have. And they're like, this is how I get through task X. And it's often something that you'd never get coached to do in typical leadership training.
What is going on, L&M family? We're going to have a super awesome conversation. It's like a part 2 to a conversation that you're not going to get to hear, but Mr. Nate Rogers and I kicked this off. I don't know, it's probably been a month or so ago. I was fortunate enough that Megan introduced us and made the connection. We had a conversation. I was like, bro, we need to get you on the podcast. He's got tons of energy, tons of insight. He is the founder of Four Eyes Facilitation, which I love the name. He's got massive experience in retail and healthcare at the executive level. And I think what you're going to learn is we have the same, I'll just call it vice in terms of experimenting, learning, growing, and serving others. And so y'all are going to get to know Mr. Nate here in a second. If this is your first time here, I'm Jesse, your selfish servant, and this is the Learnings and Missteps podcast, where you get to see how real people just like you are sharing their gifts and talents to leave this world better than they found it. And we are about to learn how Mr. Nate is going to do that right now. Mr. Nate, how are you, my man?
I'm good, Jesse. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, likewise. So I got a simple question. You ready?
Yep.
What is empathetic facilitation?
Oh, that's a simple question. It's a little trickier to answer, but I'll hit it up. So actually, when I was a kid, I called this ability called empathy sensitivity. And so stuff would happen on the playground and I'd freak out. My buddies would say, like, don't be so sensitive. And eventually, especially as I progressed through my career, I learned that it was actually my EQ or my ability to empathize with others. And when you read it in the dictionary, you're like, oh, so this dude can feel other people's feelings. And so he's in tune with them. Sweet. Like, it sounds like we're all going to go out in the woods and have granola and have a nice time. But when it comes to the business world and facilitation, what it actually means is in the room when I'm helping a group of leaders be their best, I'm reading them just because of some of my natural talents. Like I'm seeing that little tick in somebody's face that says, I'm not sure I agree with what that other individual just said. And so it helps me as I'm helping those leaders know when it's time to pause, to say, I need you to respond, Charlie, to Sally, because she just, had something to share. And I watched your face. There's something going on. Sometimes it's tone of voice, sometimes it's body language, and it's all learnable. For me, I guess I was fortunate enough to be that sensitive kid. And so it's a little ingrained in how I operate. In a nutshell, it's just the practice of facilitating people to do more than they ever could before by paying attention to how they're feeling. Yes, like all superpowers, when I was a kid, I thought it was a super weakness. It's different in different cultures, right? But at least when I was younger, we were still in the era of hiding your emotions and being more on the macho side, especially as a male. So being that kid that blushed easily or in certain circumstances would even cry, culturally or socially, it felt like a weakness. And people would even explicitly say that to me, right? And so I worked a lot to suppress it. So not to interrupt you, but yeah, it's definitely super strength, but didn't know it for a long time.
For my fellow empaths, you know exactly how exhausting this is because people look at you sideways. So you try to mask it. And naturally, I'm like, man, I got to ask Nate about this thing. Really wanted to know how his energy is impacted. And this is what he responded.
Exhausting, dude. I mean, it just takes a lot of energy to not be you. And, I feel like we've all been there before, right? And so it's tiring. It's disheartening when you shape yourself more than you should in order to, respond to the world around you, and makes you wonder okay, these people who are close to me, are they really close to me or, the version of me I've chose to put out because I think that's what others want to see. And frankly, especially as I get older, I think we all do that. I think I spent a lot of time when I was younger thinking I was the only one. But that's just a conversation none of us have with each other, right? It's like there's the version of me I put out there, and I think anyone could say a similar story. That maybe they just may have different characteristics that they're either shaping or molding to fit in differently.
Different characteristics. That really, really stood out to me. It made me curious if he knew that this empathy thing was a strength and that it would lead to the life he's living today. So let's see what he says.
Throughout my career, at like every step where most folks would say, okay, that's progress, or a step towards or a step into success, I've relied honestly on those around me to tell me, A, that I'm doing well, instead of it just coming from me like saying, oh, I know I'm crushing it right now. But then I think also I haven't always known why I've been successful. And it's interesting. I think the more leadership groups I become a part of and the more businesses I become exposed to, I think that's a common trait. We tend to be better at knowing when we weren't successful, and we pick that apart and we know why. But when you are finally sitting on top of the mountain, not everyone, and certainly not myself, can say, I know exactly why I got here. I think there's certain personality types that are very linear thinkers, and they know the path, and they're like, yeah, I got on top of the mountain because I chose to deprive myself of oxygen the same way it was going to be when I was at the top of the mountain by doing X, Y, Z and carrying rocks on my back through the park. But that's not most of us. Most of us are sort of like, well, there's a million variables going on around me, and somehow right now I'm successful. And so I had no idea until honestly very recently, probably the last 4 or 5 years, I've been really unpacking it and finally understanding more.
Are you wondering the same thing I'm wondering? I was thinking like, okay, so when exactly did you have the aha moment about this magic ability? And of course I asked.
That's a good question. I don't know that it was necessarily a single aha, but it was right around.
But before that, we're going to do the L&M family member shout out. And this one goes to Renee. Renee Duron says, I'm so glad I signed up for Jesse's Do the Damn Thing time management workshop. It completely shifted how I'm going to handle my time and ideas moving forward. One of the biggest takeaways for me was learning the art of monthly and quarterly planning, specifically to manage my squirrels. Renee, thank you. And Renee gets a extra shout out because he's also the editor of the L&M podcast. And so I'm going to make him blush a little bit. But he and 14 other people hung out on the time management workshop. I was worried that it was going to kind of be roll your eye, boring type stuff. But a lot of people got a lot of value out of it. And we're going to be doing them again in the future. And folks out there, if you're listening, you got to know, I love the comments. I love the shares. I love the stars, the thumbs up, the thumbs down. Please hit me up with your comments so that I can celebrate you in the future.
When I pivoted into a role leading a transformation team at Ohio Health, which is a pretty large 30,000 employee healthcare system in Central Ohio. And it was probably the most purposeful time where I was trying to get others to innovate and stepping back myself. So I was more creating the problems to solve and the environment for success and coaching people. But I had to pull away. Usually until that point, I was successful a lot, I felt like, because I was bringing a fresh perspective or the thinking or the work product I created. I've been leading people for 10, 15 years before that, but this was the time where I really got out of the work and into helping others thrive in the most meaningful way I ever had. And that made me start to say, well, all right, if I'm going to help somebody else, or in this case, it was like I had 6 directors reporting to me that ran these transformation projects. I was like, when we get those 6 directors to thrive doing the thing that the business has found valuable from me, I need to learn what the heck it is that works and doesn't work, right? I'm sure a lot of people who've had one moment or another where they've been successful, someone said to them, man, it'd be great if we just had a few more Jessies here. And so this was like literal moment of, Nate, go help us have 6 more Nates and innovate and transform the way we deliver care to our patients. It's like, sweet, that sounds awesome. Who the hell is Nate? You know what I mean? It's like those outside observe you all the time and you're busy watching them and observing them. So I think that was probably the biggest trigger. And then it's been kind of progressive since then. Because what you talked about peeling the onion. It's like once you start picking, it's hard to stop.
I know that introspection is like super, ultra, ultimate valuable. And I also know guiding teams effectively takes massive introspection, like for me as an individual. And Nate's like no scrub. He's got it going on. So I wanted to really get a sense of how he goes about looking inward and what value he gets out of that. Check it out, hometowners. So Primo, he's a little bit embarrassed about like asking for some backup, some esquina. And so I want to hit you up and like if you're digging this content, pues give it un like, give it the stars or leave a comment, But if you really, really want to see Primo like get all chiflado, like for the reels, hit him up on the socials, Holmes. Like if you give him a comment in the socials and let him know what you thought about the thing, pues he's going to light up. But only do it if you mean it because, yeah, you already know how Primo is. Se cree mucho el cabrón. So if you could do that, if you could leave a comment or a rating or the stars or whatever, that would be cool, man.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. And I think helping coach people through and observe them at work, doing the things that, historically I'd done well. Frankly, it was the most fantastic experiment I could have ever asked for, right? Because it was like I got to watch these folks try the systems I was building for them and the processes and trying to articulate a lot of things that were a bit more on the intuitive side for me prior. And so I'd watch and I'd be like, you know what? That person rocks the process in a session where like they're trying to get people to come up with novel ideas to solve a problem, but they didn't really connect with the people in the room. And so the people in the room tuned out. Cool. Now we got to iterate and figure out. And it was like, again, this whole time, I think I had that role for 4 years. And I think a lot of that time I spent thinking about what those on my team could do in different ways to excel and get better and better and better. I don't know that I really, really processed it about myself until this sabbatical I took that you and I discussed, like just this spring into summer. Because then it's like, it was about 4 months that I had off, which I felt so fortunate and grateful to be able to do that. And when it's quiet and you're not creating and you're not managing, it doesn't have to be 4 months, right? But you start looking inward more. And suddenly I was like, hang on a second, man. I've been coaching people to do these things. And I think we talked about this the first time we met. The past made sense to me, like all of a sudden. And I've had a couple of those moments, but this sabbatical I took definitely triggered one because I was like, man, I can think way, 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 way back to when I was in year 1, 2, 3, 4 of my career. Although my job titles had nothing to do necessarily with what I do now. I was doing this thing where I got groups of people together. I was the glue. I was helping them thrive in ways that either they were self-conscious about or didn't know about. It was like, that's what I've always done. But the wrapper around all my stuff was whatever, like manager of internet marketing or director of marketing strategy. Those titles became my thought of my identity, but that's not in those jobs how I was successful, right?
So one of the things about coaching and facilitating teams, like as the facilitator, it's kind of difficult to know if you did a good job. Now, of course, you deliver value, right? But did I deliver on the little nuanced, magical things that I really, really want to do? Like, did I leave a seed in somebody's mind that's going to grow into something greater in the future is really what I'm looking for. And so like the affirmation of did I have an effect as a facilitator is difficult because you're not there, a week later, a month later, a year later. And so I wanted to know like how Nate dealt with this affirmation thing and maybe resilience of working through with or without it. And he gave a pretty insightful answer that I wonder if this lands with you.
I think, some of that too is just me slowly but surely gaining more confidence in not worrying about if someone else doesn't tell me I did a good job, then I don't know where I fit in the universe. The more I've become comfortable with recognizing both where I'm not strong, but where I am, that has helped me process it more. Because I think, man, for me at least, validation from others is a drug. Like you get it and you're like, yes, I feel great. And then 30 seconds later, the drug wears off and you're like, somebody tell me I'm amazing again, right? I just dug up a buddy of mine in high school who I just kind of reconnected with on LinkedIn. We both like Calvin and Hobbes when we were kids, a comic. And he wrote the creator of it, Bill Watterson. And it was like my birthday was coming up and he's like, my buddy's birthday's coming up and he super loves Calvin and Hobbes. Blah, blah. And I don't know. I never saw the letter my friend sent, but I did get back like 2 big pieces of art from Bill Watterson sent in with a form letter. And the one that I just pulled up in my basement literally this weekend, the first panel up in the top left is like, congratulations, Calvin, you got an A. And that's his teacher talking to him. And then most of the big panel is like giant ticker tape parade, like Calvin gets an A, blah, blah, blah. And there's like streamers and all this stuff. And then the bottom right corner, the end of the comics, like the teacher's saying, okay, moving on to the next topic. And I'm like, that's life, dude. Like the way Calvin felt, like, dude, I got an A, especially, I mean, at least I'm assuming based on his character, he didn't get a whole lot of A's. You feel like you're top of the world when somebody else pats you on the head and then they're like, moving on. But you get hooked, right? You're like, how will I get somebody to make me feel that way again? And I think some others, as I observe them, are far better than I am at doing that for themselves, which I think is really healthy. But man, I got super addicted to that. I wish I'd been aware of in my 20s. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. It's like, I mean, it's funny, like a lot of the things that are key to success and really click for you seem like kind of common sense. And what you just said is like, duh. Like if I want to mow my lawn, I have a system of how to get my lawn mowed, and that makes total sense. But we don't always do that for our own path and for our own well-being and, enjoyment and for those around us. So yeah, it makes sense. And I have no idea why don't we learn that in kindergarten, man? Like that seems like such an important skill.
Speaking of being in our 20s, Nate's story got me reminiscing about the very first time I documented my system for influencing others. Like, don't get carried away. It's not super fancy. I found it in a journal that I had written back like when I was in 4th grade. And it was a story about how I would get girls to chase me by pulling their hair. And I think that falls squarely in the bucket of influence and me being aware of what that system looked like. And Nate gives us a little bit of insight into how he thinks of systems in the work that he does.
I did have systems probably and I wasn't just as intentional about them. It's sort of like you got a behavior plan, whether you think you do or not, right? Now, is it a good one? Well, if you put 0 effort or thought into it, it's probably, unless you're lucky, not so great. And honestly, it's a little bit of the journey I've been on the last couple of years where I've started to create a documented system out of the things that were successful for me as a leader, right? Like that's this new business Four Eyes is all about. And it's interesting because it's been a challenge. Like it's only been a real thing since Labor Day of 24 here. But suddenly like having to put on paper, like these are the tools that I'm going to repetitively use to achieve result X for others. It's a lot of work, man. I mean, your process that you resulted in getting chased by girls was straightforward. Like in the business world with tons of humans surrounding you on top of the business problems, not so straightforward, right? That's been actually the most interesting part for me is trying to like, I think you put it really well, right? Like document maybe that system that I use, which is fun. It's hard because it's my system. I'd be great at documenting your system.
More systems talk. Can you tell that I like systems? Documenting your system is a pain, but you want to know what's harder? It's identifying the things that people appreciate about you, that you're not like doing by design, those intangible things. That's something that like is ultra valuable to me because sure, there's some things that I do. Here's my plan. Here's my process and it works and it conveys the information. And I do those by design, but there's a lot of things that I do that people appreciate or want more of or really like that I'm not necessarily doing on purpose, and I don't know what it is. And the only way that I figured out how to learn it is by asking like super precise questions. And I was wondering how Nate does this for himself. So check it out.
Well, no, I think there are 2 parts to what you just hit on, Jesse. The first is having others who I would coach required me to like figure out my process. But yes, I was fortunate in that same team we were talking about earlier, that transformation team, that, the rest of my team gave me feedback too. And that was awesome because, to your point, there's stuff that you don't see in yourself. And sometimes that's the most simple, obvious stuff. And you need somebody external. At the end of the day, I think that's a simple process objectively. It's harder to get into a habit, right? But it's like when you do something that feels important afterwards, just ask. And I think sometimes, so there are like these phrases that you get taught in different training seminars. It's like, this is how you request feedback, or this is how you give, whatever works for you, man. Like I literally, like, I'll get to the end of something that I believe is important and I need to replicate. That's an important part. If it's one and done important and never going to happen again in your life, maybe not the best time to like invest everybody's energy, but something that's important and I want to replicate or improve upon. How'd that work for you guys? Because I want to know. And then sometimes people get stuck. There's a technique that when I was learning about how to run product teams in like the technology space, so like product originally came from the way technology companies referred to their software they sold. But you can use it in all kinds of spaces, right? Like you're a product, I'm a product, like a service we sell could be a product. And one of the organizations who I've learned a lot across my career by like hiring great people as consultants and then watching how they work and then trying my best to replicate the things that work the best. Well, this company called Pillar Technologies, no longer around, they got acquired by Accenture, but they taught me the retro, which again, super basic, right? If you're not getting what you need with how'd that work for all of you, it's as simple as what worked well. So those are the pluses. What would you change for next time? And they're little deltas, right? Like the little triangle. And then if you really want to, you have a team that meets over and over again. Like in the product world, you actually say, cool, what are some of the commitments and who's going to own them to achieve difference, right? But at a minimum, just that, how about we talk about the good and the not so good? It gets people going, right? Because one person will say something good and it gives the whole room permission then to give you constructive criticism. But they're waiting. Like no one wants to be the first one to be like, you talk too much. But when someone says, you know what, I love the amount of information you provide. That was really cool. Someone else can easily then jump in and say, but I wish you opened the floor up a little bit more. Like, so I think that's a nice cheat code if the room isn't familiar with straight up how'd that work for you and they start gushing. Asking a group like that for feedback is like asking your spouse to schedule a touch base. It's like buzzword overdose, right? Like nobody wants to talk like that to each other, right? We all want to enjoy each other as humans. And like, yes, conceptually it is feedback, but I'm with you, man.
So I was like totally jiving with Nate's perspective on leadership because I could see like just in the way he speaks, he practices leadership in the way I most appreciate it. And so I was like, I wonder what he thinks about academic or leadership as defined in the world of academia. And he did not disappoint. Check it out.
Oh, that's a cool question. Well, it's funny you mentioned, so this conventional leadership tactics thing, there are billions of people on the planet, right? And so you can research, sure, objectively and say like, this is what seems to work in general for leaderships. And so we're calling this the leadership system. So go rock it, dude. Well, there are people that's going to work really well for, and there are people that it's not going to, do anything but backfire on. And there are definitely behaviors that I've been coached to adapt or adopt. And some of them I'm like, man, what great advice that was because it works really well for me. And others I'm like, I never want to do that again. Not because it might be the best thing in the world for you, Jesse, but like for me in the way I show up, like, it seemed it looks really obvious you're wearing a mask sometimes when you pull off one of those behaviors. And everyone's like, who's that guy? Like, we don't need a performer, right? Like we need a teammate or a boss or whatever it is.
So far, like Nate's kind of becoming my BFF, just his insight, the way he thinks about things. So I said, you know what, let me hit him with the curveball. Let's see how he thinks about social media and if there is or isn't an opportunity or if it's a resource to like build knowledge, learn, and acquire skills through.
I agree with that. And I think, so there's a lot of stuff that I think could be a whole lot cooler about social media. But one of the things I do like about it is You can find these little like micro populations of people that share characteristics, right? And then the algorithm keeps giving you more and more and more. So I have found that in order to figure out what to keep, what to throw away, what to try, I've been finding a lot of luck in, even on just like Instagram. It's like I watch a few things about other people who succeed in business with ADHD, which I have. And they're like, this is how I get through task X. And it's often something that you'd never get coached to do in typical leadership training. But I'll try it. And sometimes it's like, well, that randomly happened to work for that person, whatever. But more often than not, because, the ADHD brain sets have some similar characteristics, I'm like, oh, that tip works for me. And similarly, it's like, as I find other people who kind of self-identify as an empath who can understand what others are feeling intuitively, like, this is how I handle this situation. I'm like, that I like. But a leader who has a totally different makeup is that linear thinker, maybe more of a command and control style of leadership. None of those things are going to work for that person. And frankly, none of their things are going to work for me. But it doesn't mean I shouldn't respect them and understand that, those things can be useful for them. For me, like whether it actually looks great or not, doesn't really matter. But like, there's a lot of shirts that you just don't feel right in, right?
Y'all already know. I love zigzagging around. I ask a bunch of questions. Nate was handling it like a champ. And so I needed to bring us back to like the real human, like inside internal experience of being in front of the room all the time. Because if you haven't done it, rather it's supposed to be like the number one fear of all people is public speaking. And then there's wackos like me and Nate that do it for a living. And there is an exchange of energy. Sure, when I'm up out there, I'm giving it all and I'm happy and I'm trying to pump up the positivity and forward thinking and all that good stuff. But I'm also receiving energy. And it can get heavy at times. So I wanted to get Nate's perspective, and you're going to want to get your notepad out for this, especially for his insight on dealing with situations that seem to be cursed with the black magic. And if you're in construction, you already know. You've been in those job trailers, and it's like, man, there's some brujeria in here. There's some bad juju. And here's what he's got to say about that.
Yeah, the honest answer is, even though I like test as an extrovert, which in theory means I rebuild my energy by being around others, when I've had to do a lot of, human work where I'm facilitating others, or I mean, really empaths like feel others' emotions, which is really weird sounding, right? But thank goodness for Guardians of the Galaxy, they have that like that character with wacky antennae. He's like an empath. I'm like, okay, now people understand. But like, it's exhausting eventually because some people bring big, big feelings, and especially if they're anger or grief or just pure like sadness that someone's bringing to the table, and you feel you're a little bit of that, not all of it, right? But you feel your share. I don't use the extrovert recharge path for that. The honest answer is I just crush some Netflix in a dark room by myself. Sometimes I have my dog with me and we just chill, but like I need that downtime to recover from it, because even though it is my nature, dude, it's a lot. I think until I realized the strengths in what I thought were weaknesses, I became a master at running away from the weaknesses and putting on facades. So I used to get, and I still do, because this is a strength I like to be able to use in some situations, but I'll get feedback of, man, when the room is going crazy, you just have total poker face, like really calm. And especially kind of middle of my career when I was successful, they're like, you can't be rattled. Man, that's one of your strengths. You're like unflappable. And I'm like, yeah, you have no idea. But I mastered my facial expressions and how I carried myself and some of my body language. And so this, for me, it was this, and I am a casual, relaxed kind of person, but I amplified that to be like, I'm unflappable. And, none of this hits me. And so I truly just built this other persona to manage it for a long time. But what I didn't realize was it still builds up in you. It doesn't matter what I put out to others. The piece of me that reacts the way I react is still happening. And so I was still raking in all their feelings. And then I was like super chill, dude. And so the boomerang part is, well, when I started realizing that was actually making me less effective I was like turning myself into the corporate robot. I was like, this is how I'm supposed to behave. I went to all the leadership seminars you were talking about. Then I was like, well, I went too far, right? How do I shed some of that? And honestly, I screwed that up a ton, man. I would try to shed some of those things and people would be like, why were you such a baby in that meeting? And I'm like, well, because dude, I'm trying to like take off all these masks, right? And it's like, it's unfamiliar territory to kind of get back to you. And now I think the boomerangs come full circle. I think my biggest tool to answer your question is to just put it out there. Like, I'm feeling some underlying anger in this room right now. Call it out. Because otherwise, what I used to do is I took everybody else's anger and I got all stressed out. And I mean, transparently, man, it turns into like digestive issues like pain in your gut and other things. It's like, when I just say I'm sensing some like anger in this room that's not been expressed, I actually just like let all that out like, back to the group. And so I'm not the only one holding the anger that I've been feeling from the room. I gave it back to him. I'm like, what are we going to do about it? And that has helped me a ton. I'm going to nerd out for just a second here, right? So I worked in healthcare for about a decade. And one of the things I learned was of all the different specialties, neuroscience has kind of the least certainty of what drives what. Like our own minds, which is, in our brains, that's where like emotions get formed, thoughts that trigger behaviors, all kinds of other stuff. It's the least understood discipline. And then what's crazy is I just learned this a few weeks ago is the latest supercomputer called Frontier that is on the top of the performance list. It finally has the exact same, at least theorized, processing capabilities of the human brain. And so you're like, oh no, like robots cut up the humans. And then you like look at what this supercomputer can do. And you're like, I'm carrying that supercomputer around in my head. I mean, I think it costs like a few $100 million to build. Now, what's crazy is we know what that supercomputer does because we humans put the software on it. We don't know our software, right? And so like those neuroscience docs that I worked with, they would say that over and over again and over again. They're like, a lot of times we're managing how to deal with symptoms from neurological conditions because the science hasn't caught up yet. So I got a supercomputer that's doing all kinds of stuff. And so does everybody else in the room in that possessed trailer. They do too. And none of us really understand what software was installed. And dude, you get one program on your laptop that isn't doing what you think it's doing. Your life goes crazy. Like they update the Microsoft Outlook, like how do you sort stuff? Like your day's over. Like the fact that you're running different software in your supercomputer than I'm running in mine, like we got to get it out there, right? Like otherwise your system just spins and goes crazy. So to just keep nerding out on brain science for a minute, I just learned I was researching for a presentation I just gave where kind of new thinking comes from in the brain, like creative thinking. And it's the process your brain uses actually starts in your hippocampus, which is the same space facts from the past are stored. And forward thinking is all it is novel reconstructions of stuff that's in your storage. And so the way I shared this with the group I presented to was one other thing I do to recharge sometimes is I cook just by myself for myself. And when I open my cupboards in my refrigerator and I've got Cocoa Krispies, marshmallows, ice cream, and some pickles, those are my raw materials to create something new. That's going to be disgusting, right? And so it's like the analogy is, all right, well, that's the stuff I put in my hippocampus, that like bookshelf of past experiences and knowledge. What's the coolest thing I can create going forward? It's the same raw materials. So it's like if you don't have spices and proteins and other fresh ingredients in your kitchen, you're never going to create something delicious and new. Same story, what you just said. Like, I mean, I've read this on like a couple different psychology organization websites, and Cleveland Clinic had a really good story about it. It's like, if you don't have memories or thoughts stored from past experience that allow you to have new thinking headed in the direction you want, you're stuck. It's like, imagine if there's a place where no one's ever thought of or seen a smartphone. So when they're imagining their future, they don't go back into their data file, their hippocampus, and be like, oh, well, I could use the touchscreen features of a smartphone to accomplish blah, 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 because they'd never heard of one. And so I think that's where the science supports what you just said. If you don't fill your memory banks up with the raw materials to go forward, you're never going to go forward. That gave me a new appreciation for this concept of like be a continuous learner. I'm like, seriously, I got to keep being a student forever. But I've shifted my gear to saying like, well, I'm continuously putting delicious things in my cupboards. So when it's time to cook something that really satisfies me, I got the raw materials. And you're right, man. If all you've got is, garbage memories stored, let's face it, like the reality is some of us have garbage experiences and garbage tastes even. Like I got some things that I love to do. And some of that Netflix stuff that I've been through, probably not so helpful. But at a minimum, I can flood my memories with other knowledge and experiences that could be constructive.
Did you know that the seahorse is my spirit animal?
Yeah, that's actually, so this is going to sound like I know a lot more than I do, but it's actually named that because hippocampus is the first part of the scientific name for the seahorse. Yeah, it's literally named after the seahorse.
Oh my goodness. So Nate mentioned continuous learning, which of course I'm a huge advocate for. And it just tickled me around this continuous improvement stuff, which, I am one of the afflicted. And so I said, okay, Nate, let's talk about continuous improvement. What do you think about it? Have you been exposed to it? And what I like about his answer is the real issue for a lot of us is this like pursuit of perfection or pursuit of excellence. And the way he deals with it is, I think it's a healthy way to deal with it. Check it out.
I think it's awesome. One of my favorite slides that I completely borrowed from someone else is like, I kind of refocused it a little bit my own way. I found a GIF of a pit crew changing tires in real time. Now it's sped up and you watch it and you're like, I want to learn more about how pit crews work. Not because I'm ever going to change tires at the speed they do, but there's something in the process, in the system. Those guys communicate with no words in a noisy environment and do miraculous things that none of us think we could. We don't even think we can move our hands that fast. Sweet. I may never work in an industry where that's remotely relevant, but the way that they have and it's got all the sand out of the gears of that process and iterated and achieved something that blows your mind. You can apply that anywhere. And so that's a cool little piece of knowledge that I found interesting. And so I went down a little rabbit hole and I have applied it numerous times to just be like, you know what? It might take the average human 30 minutes to change a tire and it takes these guys, whatever it is, 6 seconds. Well, what's our version of getting from 30 minutes to 6 seconds, right? Like it can be done. It's humanly possible. But dude, you can't even see all the things that are going on at once because it's too much. Yeah.
All this time I've been having fun with Nate. I'm pretty sure you've been having fun with Nate. And I almost completely forgot to ask him about his business because he does have a business. The name of his business is Four Eyes Facilitation. The link is going to be in the show notes, so check him out. Don't go clicking until you hear his description of what it is that he does, why he does it, because I'm pretty sure after you hear that, you're going to be like, man, I need to connect with this dude because he can help us, or I know somebody he can help.
Yeah, sweet. So maybe I'll flip the order. So foureyesfacilitation.com, all spelled out in words, no numbers, is the website. You can get a detailed view of what I'm up to. And I'm saying because this is the first time ever. This is just me. And the intent is, I'm selling the experience and the skills I've built, the first 25 years of my career. Eventually it may grow, but foureyesfacilitation.com. And what anyone will find looking on that site or talking to me is my whole goal is to offer workshops, speaking engagements, training that allow people to accomplish things that they never thought they could on the upstream front end of business process. So making sure the vision is supported by a strategy that is outcome focused and accessible to all in the organization. And so I'll facilitate strategic workshops, even visioning if necessary, but then all the way through to we know what we're going to do this quarter. We've got a nice strategy that differentiates us and we know how we win now. What are the initiatives we're going to hit this year? Let's define them. And how do you resource those things so that not everybody says, oh my gosh, I got too much to do and too few resources, right? And then I'm out. In a nutshell, it's like I facilitate alignment, but a lot of times it's in a space where we create a lot of myth around strategy and innovation and assume it's only for a special few. Sure, some of us are more intuitively in that space. Some of us are more intuitively creative in building new ideas. but it's all process that with the right person in the room, you can nail. And so, I have a lot of proprietary tools that I've built, which by the way, I give away free to all my clients because I don't believe in charging people for a tool. I'm charging them for my presence. But yeah, I use those to help facilitate people through structured strategic development, innovating new products and services, all the way up to, all right, we're resourced and ready to go. And the goal is, you got a leadership team that's lockstep on all of that coming out of the session. And lockstep doesn't necessarily mean, you battled through so that everybody had consensus on everything. Lockstep means we're all committed, right? Like there might have been something that I proposed and you had a counterpoint to it. And our mutual CEO said, Jesse's idea is the way we're going to do it. Walking out of line means I say, I'm in. I'm going to be there with Jesse, just like it was my idea.
Oh, baby, this was a good one. And as usual, I hit him with the finale question, which was, what is the promise you are intended to be? And his response does not fail.
I am intended to fulfill the promise of helping people realize they've got capabilities within them they never knew about and bring them to life so that they can thrive. And honestly, I know this part sounds a little more on the woo-woo spectrum, but bring some joy to their life. And so I think in a nutshell, it's bring a lot more joy to people's life. But how? Help them understand strengths they never thought they had, including how to collaborate with folks of all different makeups.
Thank you for sticking it out all the way to the end. I know you got a whole lot of stuff going on. And in appreciation for the gift of time that you have given this episode, I want to offer you a free PDF of my book, Becoming the Promise You're Intended to Be. The link for that bad boy is down in the show notes. Hit it. You don't even have to give me your email address. There's a link in there. You just click that button and you can download the PDF. And if you share it with somebody that you know who might feel stuck or be caught up in self-destructive behaviors, that would be the ultimate. You sharing that increases the likelihood that it's going to help one more person. And if it does help one more person, then you're contributing to me becoming the promise I am intended to be. Be kind to yourself, be cool, and we'll talk at you next time. Peace!